Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. She ran and found Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. She said, "They have taken the Lord's body out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." Peter and the other disciple started out for the tomb. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He stooped and looked in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. Then Simon Peter arrived and went inside. He also noticed the linen wrappings lying there, while the cloth that had covered Jesus' head was folded up and lying apart from the other wrappings. Then the disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. For until then, they still hadn't understood the scriptures that said Jesus must rise from the dead. Then they went home. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. Well, good morning, Sojourn. Peace be with you. It's great to be with you guys. Truly delighted to be here with you. If you're a guest, if you're a visitor, thanks for making us part of your Easter tradition this year. My name's Jonah, and I'm one of the pastors here at Sojourn. Thanks to Jake and Katie McBroom. They did the decorations. If you know them, thank them. It's fun seeing the room filled with life, so really, really grateful for them. Boy, I'm tickled this morning. I'm just happy to be here. Some of it is because I get to talk about something in the Bible that's been chewing on my brain for a little while, and it gets me so excited. This story is so delightful in so many ways. And I get to talk a little bit about what Easter does for us this morning. What does it matter? Why does it change things? So I'm going to give you a story that's both a true story and a metaphor. Okay? Sorry, I was looking at Josh. I don't know. Sorry, buddy. Love you. Happy Easter. You look good today, by the way. You look nice. So y'all know Brown Station Way. You guys know this street? If you're not from here, Brown Station Way is the big road you take to go out to 65, the highway from here. I drive my kids that way to school most mornings. Most of the year, it's still dark out in the mornings. Many times I've been startled driving down Brown Station Way, as Pastor Travis would say. This room's got me. I don't know why everyone sat over here this morning, but I'm going to look over here a little bit more. More than once and more than twice this has happened, Pastor Travis. That's something Pastor Travis says. On top of the flood wall, which thanks be to God we have those flood walls, over the last couple of weeks. You know the flood wall I'm talking about in the Greenway? If you're driving down Brown Station Way, on top of the Greenway, more than once, more than twice, I've said, "Oh my gosh, a bear," because I see this big black shadow on top of the green wall. It looks scary and uncertain. Like, there are black bears in Floyd County, if you didn't know, but if you've ever seen a bear in real life, it's always an alarming thing. What's this bear doing out here? And why is that same bear still going there? But by the time I'm coming home and the sun has begun to rise, you can see it real clearly. It's just a pipe. I don't know what it's doing. There's pipes on the flood wall. I don't know, but it's a huge pipe on top of the flood wall that, again, more than once, more than twice, I've thought was a bear. With just a little bit of a light, the things we fear often begin to disappear. With just a little bit of light, the things that we're so afraid of often begin to disappear. With just a little bit of light, we can find courage to hope. And that's really all I wanted to say this morning. There's always a reason to hope. I wonder what you might do with just a little bit more hope. I wonder who might you become? What might you do if you had just a little more hope? But hope is hard, and hope is scary. The kind of hope the Bible talks about is not just wishful thinking. It's not just imagining something being better. Real hope, biblical hope, you might think of it as an active looking, an active anticipation, a restructuring of your life. We've all lived this in various ways. You hope that the child comes, so what do? You assemble a crib, right? You're doing something out of your hope that anticipates what will come. You hope that vacation comes, so you make the reservations. But the possibility of hope, the necessity of hope, always means the presence of darkness in some way. Something is missing. We wouldn't need hope if we didn't hope something was going to change. So to have hope also means we have to face some kind of pain. One of the reasons I love the Bible, one of the reasons I love Easter Sunday is because it combines all we are as humans, all we experience, all we feel, all we live. It combines darkness, disappointment, pain, loss, all these difficult words that we're all familiar with. But peeking behind the darkness of every Easter morning is the great sunrise of our faith. And we get to see what happens with just a little bit more light. Consider how our story began this morning from John chapter 20. It says, early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb. You ever had such a bad day you can't sleep that night? Anybody? Yeah, you can amen that even if it's sad. One guy in the back put his hand up. My man. More than once, more than twice, I found myself walking around my neighborhood or driving down country roads or sitting in a Waffle House in the middle of the night. You ever gone to Waffle House at 3 a.m. because you had nowhere else to go? Why is Mary up so early? This is a question we should be considering. I grant you that I'm speculating now, but I think it's pretty well-founded speculation. I think Mary's up so early because she couldn't sleep. Why couldn't Mary sleep? What do you think Mary saw when she closed her eyes at night? She just watched her friend executed. I'm certain it was one of those experiences that was burned into her mind, and I wonder if she couldn't close her eyes at night because when she did, all she could see was the face of the one that she had thought was the Lord, the one that she then watched beaten and crucified. She watched him die. She watched him buried, and there it was, a darkness so deep that she couldn't sleep. Who among us has not felt what she's feeling? Verse 2 says, she found the stone rolled away from the entrance. She ran and found Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. She said they've taken the Lord's body. Have you ever had grief compounded by grief? A loss compounded by even further loss? Not only is he dead, and not only did he die the way that she watched him die, but now his grave is desecrated. Can you imagine the sorrow? Loss upon loss. Peter and John don't ask Mary any questions. They just start running. Thankful for a little bit of levity at this point. We get one of the funniest verses in the Bible. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. The guy who outran Peter is the one who wrote this, so he's just kind of... But after this bit of humor, we get to one of the stranger verses in the Bible. He stooped and looked in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. This is that moment, maybe you've had it happen to you, where you get the call that it's time to go to the hospital. You need to come and say goodbye. And there outside your loved one's room, you freeze. You can't go in. I wonder if you've had that experience. You're too scared, you're too sad, you're too afraid. You get right to that moment of facing the pain and you freeze. So I promise the sermon's not going to stay here the whole time, but we have to take a moment on Easter Sunday to realize that the first Easter began in darkness. Literal, metaphorical, emotional. It begins with fear, with sadness, with loss, with disappointment. And are these not the reasons we have to not hope? Because for many of us, when we've tried to hope, this has been the result. Isn't this the kind of thing that ends up happening when we allow ourselves to hope? If you're familiar with the Gospels, though, you'll know that Peter, the apostle, the disciple of Jesus, is kind of a fire-ready aim type. He's brash and assertive, and so he skips the questions and goes right to the action, and he just goes storming into the tomb. Simon Peter arrived and went inside. He also noticed the linen wrappings there, while the cloth that had covered Jesus' head was folded up and lying apart from the other wrappings. Peter found what Mary had already told them, an empty tomb, the body is gone. And did you notice the first conclusion they made? The first conclusion they made was the body was stolen. Pain has a way of stealing our hope and blinding our eyes. Grief fogs the memory. Jesus told them this would happen, and he told them what would happen next, and they can't remember any of it. When the pain begins to creep in, we so often assume everything else will collapse too. When the pain creeps in, the drain pipes on Brown Station Way look like bears. I wish we had some verse that could say the tragic things in life aren't actually tragic, or the sad things in life aren't actually sad. We don't have those verses. The Bible never says the tragic is not tragic. What the Bible does tell us, and even more often what the Bible often shows us, though, is that the story always turns. The Bible shows us the ways that light peeks through, and it allows us to see clearly. We have the gift of seeing this story and not living it, which means we can see it a bit more clearly than they can. This story sheds some light for us, and it's inviting us to hope by helping us see that embedded in all of our stories are clues that our story is not over. Or to put it another way, embedded in all of our stories are clues that the story will turn. Or maybe the pipe is not a bear after all. So consider with me. This is when I start getting excited about the Bible. If the Bible, I know some of you got drugged to church this morning, and I'm sorry, but I'm also glad you're here, right? Like, some of you are here because Mamaw made you come, and so I'm just going to talk to you for a second. Don't raise your hand. I don't want Mamaw mad at you, right? You're cool. Maybe somewhere along the line you came to believe that the Bible was a book of heroes, or it was stories about these incredibly pious, perfectly well-behaved people. If the Bible is a book of heroes with incredible faith and perfectly pious people, why would we have Mary Magdalene so depressed that she cannot sleep? Why would you have her crying outside the tomb? Why have her running to the boys in panic? Why would you put this in here? The most superficial answer to that is because this is what actually happened. The Bible's not a fairy tale. It's a real story of things that actually happened. There's a lot more things that if you were trying to manicure a story, you wouldn't put in here. Why would you have the boys ignoring Mary and go off running? She's up early. She's likely crying. We know if you continue in John 20, she's crying after this. Gentlemen, if your wife comes home or a dear friend comes into your room sobbing in a panic, it's not typically good to just go running outside the front door. Why would you include this? They look so unkind and so uncaring for their friend who's hurting. Why would you include this? It's what actually happened. Why would you include the detail about John being faster than Peter? Because it's what actually happened. If we're willing to believe the story actually happened, if you are willing to believe this story actually happened, you will see light appear in the horizon of your life. The shadows will lift, and we will see that all is not as it seems. Hear verses 6 through 7 again. Tell me if you notice anything strange here. Simon Peter arrived and went inside. He also noticed the linen wrappings lying there. So first of all, if you think that John just put that thing about him being faster than Peter in there to look good for the Bible, why would he then make himself look like a coward too scared to go inside the tomb? He's just recounting what actually happened. And then if we're still in the grave robber theory here, which is what Mary is afraid of, what the boys are afraid of, think of how strange this is. The robbers came in, they unwrapped the body of Jesus. So their burials, they didn't get coffins, they got wrapped in linen cloth. They unwrapped the body and left the cloth and then that makes no sense. If you were committing a crime, why would you do something totally unnecessary to slow down the time it takes for you to commit the crime? It gets even worse for these grave robbers, though. They're very unintelligent. Verse 7, it says, Peter also noticed the linen wrappings lying there, while the cloth that had covered Jesus' head was folded up and lying apart from the other wrappings. They unwrapped the body, and then they folded up the cloth. You see what I'm saying? Could you imagine if someone broke into your house, stole your valuables, and said, hey, before we go, let's make all of the beds? Wouldn't that be so weird? They wouldn't fold it up because the body wasn't stolen, we know now. The body was resurrected. The Lord had placed all of these details in their story that the pain and the grief, they missed it in the moment. But we can see it so clearly now. They were too blinded by fear and too blinded by grief, but there they were, the clues, the whispers that the story wasn't over. Then the disciple who reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. I wish this were different, but sometimes you cannot find hope until you've faced your pain. They had to go in. They had to face what could have been, their greatest loss or disappointment. Sometimes we have to face the darkness we so desperately want to avoid, because only when we look into the darkness can we see the light of resurrection. Until then, verse 9 says, until they had gone in, until they had looked, they still hadn't understood the scriptures that said Jesus must rise from the dead. Jesus told them it would happen. God has told us his promises over and over and over again. The Bible is so filled with lovely details like this story, like the ones in the story. Yes, because it's what actually happened, but even more so, they're here to help us have faith that the stories are true, so that in seeing how Jesus' story ends, we might find strength to hope again. Because if Jesus is truly raised from the dead, that means light is piercing the darkness. Jesus' body was not stolen, it was raised, just as he promised, just as this book tells us. And if Jesus kept that promise, it means he keeps all of his promises. The disciples thought it was a crime scene, but it was a resurrection scene. The light means that it's true. Here's just some examples: that your sins are forgiven. This light means you are not forever broken, but you will be healed. The light means that even the darkest shadow, death itself, cannot hold you, because you will not simply die. You will be raised. And with new eyes, filled with the light of resurrection, we will see the shadows retreat from our lives. The resurrection of Jesus means there is always reason to hope. I promise you, because God promises you, your story will always turn in this life or the next, because Jesus' story turned. There's always reason to hope. I'm going to say that a couple more times and be done. You will walk out of your grave because Jesus walked out of his grave. There's always reason to hope. The darkness lingers, I grant you, but the light of resurrection is shining. There is always reason to hope. Jesus is risen, church. Thanks be to God. If you're willing and able, stand with me and let's pray together.